Hi everyone, I'm Naïma. This video is about a topic that I have long been avoiding. A part of my life and the lives of many others that has been deeply impacted by long COVID. This video is about long COVID and work. Most of us with long COVID are of prime working age, in our mid-20s to mid-40s, at a time where we are the most focused on earning money, building something for ourselves, or supporting our family. But there are many layers to long COVID and work. On one level, we have the physical impact of the illness leaving us potentially debilitated. But on a deeper level, we have the societal impacts of having to navigate work in a new body without the tools to do so. I'll be talking about some recent data in the UK and the US about how work has impacted those of us with long COVID. I will also share how my life was interrupted and how I was not supported by my employer during a life-changing period of my life. Keep watching and don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Let's get this channel to 500 subscribers. The way that long COVID impacts your ability to work is a broad spectrum. For example, some people are bedridden and unable to complete basic tasks, let alone work. Others might be able to go for a walk, but they might have cognitive challenges, make it very difficult for them to concentrate, and others might be able to work the same amount as they used to, but it means that they are too fatigued to engage with other facets of their lives like socializing, care work, or driving, or things like that. For those who are able, some accommodations can be made to support being at work. One of the key things to do is to have a conversation with your employer and say something along the lines of, I need help. Here's the things I think I can do. Here's what I think I can't do. I don't know how long this will last. I want to get back to work, but I need help to do it. Some accommodations might include remote work, reduced hours, a designated break area, flexible scheduling, special equipment, things like that. The problem is having to work out what you need before even being diagnosed or knowing what accommodations can be made. Also, none of this applies to contractors or to people with 0-hour contract where there is no employer to escalate this to. In the early months of my illness, I didn't know what my diagnosis was, let alone what accommodations might be available. Long COVID was not yet in the public conversation, and doctors could not even tell me what this strange mix of symptoms was. And I kept thinking that one day I would wake up and that it would all be over. A recent survey in the UK about long COVID and work reveals that 79% of those that have been impacted by long COVID are key workers, people who faced higher levels of exposure to COVID-19, and 29% have been impacted by long COVID for 1 year or more. On average, the respondents had 9 out of 21 symptoms. 52% had experienced some form of discrimination or disadvantage because of their condition at work. Many workers were faced with disbelief and suspicion, and 19% had their employer question their symptoms. 13% of the respondents faced questions from their employer about whether they had long COVID at all, and 18% had used an amount of sick leave that had triggered some form of absence management or HR processes. 9% had used up all of their sick leave and had been told that there would be negative consequences if they took more, and 5% had been forced to leave their jobs because of long COVID. When reading these findings, I identified with almost all of the statistics. Before I caught COVID, I was healthy and able to work 60 to 80-hour weeks consistently. I'd attend networking events in the evening. I still managed to have time to have a busy social life. When my long COVID symptoms kicked in, I had a full-time job where I was working 9 to 6 on average, sometimes more. I was completing an online course which took up about 20 hours of my time, and I was also working on a startup idea which took up roughly 20 hours per week. My initial infection was relatively mild, as those of you who've been following my story know. I took 3 days off work and I rested, or thought I rested, and seemed to recover. After a latent phase where my body seemed normal, in October 2020, my long COVID symptoms well and truly kicked in. I remember being at my desk and feeling a pulsing in my chest that went on for hours. I pushed through the pain for several days, hoping that it would go away. And I didn't tell anyone at work about this until a few days later when I was completely bedbound. I called in sick to say that I wasn't feeling well, and really at this point, that was an understatement. From that point on, my relationship with work changed forever. Because of the relapsing and remitting nature of this illness, I would call in sick for a few days, I would get better after resting, and then I would go back to my usual schedule. After a few days of continuing to work, my symptoms would get worse again. Because I didn't know anything about pacing, I kept trying to push through my symptoms, thinking that eventually my body would just adjust back to what it was used to. And I also felt this growing sense of shame that I was not able to push through this, that I wasn't strong enough to keep going. My job involved a lot of presenting, liaising with clients and public-facing work. Everything seemed to take me 4 times as long to do as it used to. On good days, I'd be working until 10 p.m. doing something that otherwise should have taken me just a few hours, and I'd wake up in more pain the previous day and have to go through it all again. I also couldn't sleep from the stress of not having a diagnosis and not knowing what was happening to me. Even though my sick days were always approved, there was a sense that my colleagues did not understand or believe what was happening to me. I was singled out for not performing my work to a good enough standard. I had to give 1-hour presentations online, even though I struggled to breathe or even sit up. Work, which had always been a source of satisfaction and pride, became something to get through. I remember having several deadlines to work towards that I completed, and there were several times where my manager hinted and outright said that my work was not up to an acceptable standard. After telling them that I was struggling to sit up, they said that everyone was tired because it was the end of the year, feeding into the notion that my symptoms were not real. Behind the scenes during this time, I was going to A&E. I was seeing doctors and getting no closer to knowing what my diagnosis was. After 3 months of this, I had to call in sick. With very little sick leave left, I had to make a decision between my job and my health. I was lucky enough to have some savings and people around to support me, but not everyone has been so lucky. Unfortunately, there are too many challenges to count when it comes to working with long COVID or any chronic condition for that matter. Firstly, long COVID is an invisible disability with a wide range of symptoms that can be difficult to measure or understand. This leads to many of us having to advocate for ourselves before we have any answers about our illness. Secondly, we know that long COVID is long, but how long? When we're asked the usual questions by colleagues like, are you feeling better? How are you feeling? It points to the fact that we struggle to have transparent conversations about prolonged chronic illness and the accommodations that are needed to keep people in the workforce. Finally, we are also creating deep-rooted inequalities. People most at risk of long COVID include people over 40, women, Black people, people with underlying health conditions already. When you factor in that these people already experience a significant pay gap, we are compounding challenges for people more likely to be underpaid and undervalued. We are facing a future where people of working age are out of the workforce for months or years at a time if governments and organisations do not intervene. There are 7 million people in the US who are unable to work full-time or who have had to scale back their work because of long COVID. There are over 1 million people in the UK with long COVID. Long COVID is not going anywhere. And yet the Equalities and Humanities Rights Commission in the UK, which was set up to promote and enforce equality and non-discrimination laws, has said discussions continue on whether long COVID symptoms constitute a disability. Without case law or scientific consensus, the EHRC does not recommend that long COVID be treated as a disability. Again, I'm putting long COVID in quotation marks because that is the way that it has been described in this quote. And I don't see this being used for any other illnesses. The first step in us improving the situation for those of us with long COVID in the UK is for it to be classified as a disability, because disabled people are protected by the Equality Act from discrimination, harassment and victimisation. Right now we're living in a limbo with an illness that is so difficult for employers to understand. We need to force employers and governments to take the necessary steps that we cannot be left in the margins and ignored. I don't believe that this is a cure-all or that this will resolve all of our issues, but I think when it comes to work, in order for this to be taken with the utmost seriousness, having a disability status would get us some of the way towards that goal. We need the correct classification for this illness to substantiate our request for support. I've posted some links and resources in the description bar if you want to continue to do some more research into this. There are a few organisations like Long COVID Work UK and Chronic Illness Inclusion UK who are doing some great work in advocating for this condition. I'd love to hear some of your experiences with long COVID and work from those who have felt that their employers have been completely supportive and they've made the necessary accommodations to support this transitional phase, to others who have had negative experiences. Please comment, as I'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here and you'd like to hear more about my experience with long COVID, watch the video on screen now. And don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in my next video.